Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. Of course, we've just been down at Carrow Road this morning, meeting the new man in the Norwich City dugout. Johannes Hoff Thorup is officially unveiled to the media. Of course, we want your thoughts if you had the opportunity to listen to any of it thus far. If not, we're going to give you our reaction. And of course, if you're watching this later on, you can obviously get down in the comment section below and let us know what you think about everything he had to say. Adam Harvey, joined by Seaman and Paddy Davitt. Paddy, I'll come to you first. You've done quite a few of these, probably in the past, different managers. Johannes Hoff Thorup unveiled. What did you make of sort of his first words, and maybe how did that compare to previous managers you've had dealt with before?
I thought he was very self-assured, very confident, knows what he's all about, and that came through clearly to me. There was nothing that he got phased about, whether it was transfer scenarios to leaving Denmark and encountering what for him is completely new territory now. But you get the sense just from that touch point we had with him today, on top of what we've learned from him since he was confirmed, that I think gets phased too easily. And a lot of positivity, and you've put the video up now and people can consume that on our channels at their leisure. And I would really defy anybody to watch that entire, I think it was about 35 minutes or so with him and Ben Napper, and not be positive and not be optimistic, and hoping that there's a good future around the corner. And also worth pointing out, because there was a little bit in the Danish media that almost gave the suggestion that this coming season would be a transition one, and there wasn't too many expectations. I mean, he was very keen when I put that to him to shut that down and make it clear that no, they believe still with this group of players, with the right additions, that they can be pushing at right end of the table. So it may turn into a transition season, but there's no sense from the main man in charge now that he's looking at this as a building block season. So overall, I mean, you asked comparative to previous managers. Probably the only one comparable recently was the Farker one, because that felt like a new dawn and a new era, and the club trying to do something different and go in a different direction. And there was a lot of that today, I think. Different starting points. I think financially there's a bit more stability now. You've got obviously the American presence in the boardroom. So that is a contrast between now and 17, 18 as it was. But not simply because it's an overseas coach, but I just think there is more of this could be quite exciting and this could be quite an enjoyable ride, as opposed to, dare one say, the sort of Dean Smith contrast, which was very much kind of almost going through the motions. And I don't recall, I'd have to go back and look at it, but I don't recall coming away from his opening press conference and thought that Norwich were now in the hands of something that felt quite visionary and quite progressive. I think it felt quite tried and trusted. And at that point, maybe they thought Dean Smith was what they needed to try and keep him in the division. As we know, it turned out not to be the case, and it's been a bit of a tale of woe subsequently, primarily. But with this guy now sat alongside Ben Napper, that is a very definitive break from the past. That is very much now on the footballing side of this football club, the faces of a new era. And on the evidence of our first touch point with him today, I think if I'm a Norwich fan, I'm quite excited about what the future holds.
Obviously, we've heard a lot from Ben Napper maybe about his vision, Sam, and how he sees football. Felt like David Wagner didn't quite align to that. Of course, he's sort of echoed, I suppose, that sentiment a little bit today, and sort of referencing that, they want to take it in a slightly different direction. Yeah. What Johannes Hoff Thorup had to say in terms of his view of football and how he sees it, do you think that is what Ben Napper wants this Norwich City side to look like, and what the fans maybe want to buy into?
Yeah, I think you could take as much from the way that him and Thorup spoke about each other as you could from what he said about Wagner and the reason why he sort of dispensed with him. And ultimately it was the reasons that everyone was talking about in sort of the last bit of his tenure, in terms of the pathway for young players, the style of play that Napper wanted to see. And I think it is what everyone's been predicting and what everyone's been taking from Thorup's time at Nordsjælland. And although everyone will be aware of what his principles were there, I think it was encouraging, and it will be encouraging for fans who now go and watch it, to hear about that discussed in the terms of what Norwich are going to look like going forward. He also spoke about the fact that he feels the players they have currently are maybe more suited to that system, and that he feels they have the technical ability to go and do that. So the signs for anyone who chiefly wanted the tactics to change and are excited about this appointment from that point of view, we'll be really pleased with how much of a topic that was. And it wasn't as vague as a lot of coaches tend to be. It wasn't as vague as Wagner was when he first came to the club and sort of discussed his style of play, especially Dean Smith, who really didn't talk about any style of play at all at any point. So for people who have missed that and who want to see a demonstrable and reliable identity from their club, they'll be really pleased with that, because not only are those the principles he's shown at Norwich, they're what he wants to take to Norwich. They're what Ben Napper wants as well. It feels everyone is now aligned on this possession-based attacking style of football. And I think when you see the coaches who have been loved the most at Carrow Road, the teams who have done the best, and the times that people look back on most fondly, it's always been that more positive, more attacking style of football. So I think that bodes really well for the future. And yes, I think it was definitely a huge part of Napper's decision to hire Thorup, as he suggested in many different ways across the 35 minutes.
Of those players in the building, Paddy, they were probably consuming this in some capacity. At some point today, he sort of spoke maybe about needing the experienced players. He spoke about the youth players. A lot's been made kind of youth development. That's so pivotal in the role that Norwich play over in Denmark. If you're a younger player or an older player, how do you view what he had to say today?
I thought it was very clever, the messaging. I mean, I did ask him specifically, had he either certain individuals in the playing staff or more generally, had he been able to speak to them? And he made the point, there's quite a few away in the Euros, a few in the Copa America now, and he didn't want to really, take their focus away, those players. So it doesn't sound like the players have had anything by way of a touch point. As we know, they'll be back in, the ones non-international wise, a week today for testing, 28th. And then the following Monday is effectively when pre-season begins in earnest. And I think that's when he'll start to get his messages across about what Sam touched on there, what he's going to require of them. But I thought it was those two groups you mentioned, both the young players. He made it very clear. I'm trying to think now how I framed it to him, but it was kind of, if you're an Abu Kamara or a Brad Hills, for example, you're coming back and you need to impress him to see if you're part of the team. And he kind of corrected me a bit and said, no, they are part of the squad. It's just whether they can push through now and, in his view, over this 6-week period, show that they're ready to go. Because if they are, I think under this guy, they will get a chance. But then really clever, I thought, was the experienced element. Because if you're a Shane Duffy, you're an Ashley Barnes, one or two others, you're probably looking at it being a little bit concerned. A 35-year-old Dane coming in with a reputation for playing young players and developing academy-produced players. Where do I stand in that? And he drew a parallel. I think he said his captain at Norwich was 35, didn't he? Same age as him. He lent on him quite. I think there was one or two other experienced players. I think the keeper was quite old there as well in terms of young player profile. So probably if I'm a senior player at Norwich and consuming that, then it sounded like, yes, I value experience. I value older players who can set the example and can bring the younger ones along. I know I can't just go completely one end of the spectrum and just pack a team full of young players who are unproven at this level and expect to succeed. So I thought that was very clever messaging, that essentially in the same breath, he's reached out to those younger players and said, the stage is set for you, impress me and you will get an opportunity, but also still saying he values those older players. And to pull all those strands together, he and Ben Napper feel that there's a lot of talent in that group, and if they all can row in behind what he's trying to do and the style of football he's trying to play, that he has personnel already in the squad, and we'll get into the transfer elements later on. But in the here and now, he has players he feels, my sense was, to implement that style of play that he wants to play. And even dare I say, if you're an Ashley Barnes or a Shane Duffy, you're probably going to come back and be quite energised by that, because I guess it's easier the older you get to feel you've been around the block and you've heard all these things before. But I would imagine even those sort of players, very seasoned professionals, will come back and be energised by this guy and what he's got to say and how he carries himself. And if that is the case, and you can get that blend, which maybe they were striving to do last season, this time last summer when they went and got Barnes, they went and got Duffy, Stacey, Danny Bart came in then in the January. Didn't quite work out in terms of meshing all that together. Okay, they got into the top 6, but we know how that ended. But if this guy can really bring that all together and marry the older with the younger players within this very progressive and front-footed ambitious style of football, then again, go back to my earlier comments, hugely exciting season ahead for a Norwich fan, I think.
Yeah, Sam, obviously, I think when Farker maybe arrived, a lot was spoken around time and this project requiring time. I think Paddy or somebody in the room put the question to him sort of about maybe needing time. He sort of maybe bullishly came back a little bit and was like, no, we've got quality players in the building here. You know, there's an opportunity to try and strive for promotion this season. There's 24 teams in the league and everyone's going to have the same goal. What did you make of that? You know, is it going to be a time factor or do you sort of agree with him and that there's a lot of quality in this squad and maybe this season they can kick on?
Yeah, I think there was probably a level of managing his new sort of public in that. And I think where he has been maybe slightly more honest and direct in the Danish media about the fact that he feels he won't necessarily receive heavy criticism for failing to get Norwich promoted this season. But maybe the expectation is after that. Obviously, now he knows there will be more Norwich fans' eyes on this press conference. He knows it's more maybe clear and direct that he's speaking as the Norwich head coach in this situation. I think he was always going to be slightly more guarded in terms of how he spoke about it. It wasn't like he came out and said, absolutely, we expect to be in the promotion race this season. And if we don't get there, we'll be really disappointed. I think it was just somewhere between having a bit of ambition and acknowledging that it will be difficult. So I think it will still take time. I don't think expectations have just completely shifted and all of a sudden between that Danish interview and this one, he's changed his mind and decided that he's got the players to necessarily be pushing for promotion. But it's also good to see that he recognises he is at a very big club for this level, that the fans want to see some sort of progress and to compete at least towards the top end of this division. But equally, I think he'll be realistic, and as much as he'll want to deliver those messages to his new players, and he'll want them to feel that they're good enough and that he trusts them, I think he'll be realistic about the fact that he isn't in a great position to try and get Norwich to the Premier League at the first attempt. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by how he addressed it. He probably went a little bit stronger than I expected. But I think when you add that with the quotes that Ben Napper supplied later on, and when he was asked about the sort of time element, it did feel like there was a bit of a recognition that patience will be needed. So yeah, I think it was more about a balance and more about the audience that he knew he had for this press conference. But yeah, it was definitely more ambitious and more short-term focused than maybe I think a few of us were expecting going into it.
Yeah, of course, he was sort of asked around maybe his assistant, Glenn Riddersholm, who's, of course, joining. Those two not worked directly together, but he spoke about kind of being on similar courses across in Denmark, and that's maybe where they built their relationship. There was maybe names on the table, and he was the one they went straight to, Paddy. The culture kind of element, he spoke a lot around that with him and youth development. Do you think there's kind of the pillars that maybe he looked at and thought, this is the man for me maybe to lean on in difficult moments?
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying I think he worked at a national age group level, Riddersholm, didn't he? Was it Denmark or was it Sweden? I can't remember. But so, you know, he clearly has that background as well as being a manager in his own right. And Ben Napper touched on it. We've heard it ad nauseum since this deal went through and he was confirmed as David Wagner's replacement, that one of the strongest parts of his coaching credentials was developing young talent, as he did at Nordsjælland, and trusting young players. And we know that is the model. Ben Napper confirmed it, again, under the self-funded auspices that is Norwich City Football Club 2024, they need to trade players and they need to develop players to be good enough in the short and the mid-term to play in Norwich's first team. But ultimately, it's a trading model. And that's why, if they have a guy who has a reputation for, as Farker did, let's be honest, to hothouse, give him the raw material in the first place, and we will get into maybe Kenbo and some positive news in that direction as an example, a primary example that this guy has shown in Denmark, while maintaining a team who were good enough to compete at the top end in Denmark and go and do a few, decent results in European competition as well, that he can balance that off with actually developing players, because that is a key pillar of this football club's model, effectively, has been in recent years. Maybe it's kind of, in the pursuit of trying to sustain themselves in the Premier League, it got sidelined to a degree. And they went a little bit more pragmatic, a little bit more short term, but we've very much gone back to the future in that regard. And, hence why, if I'm an Abu Kamara, Brad Hills, Tompkinson, Adebayor, these players, if I show I'm good enough, if I show I can step up, they will get an opportunity under this head coach, and they will also get an opportunity at this football club. And that's maybe where Kenbo and his representatives are coming from. They know that this is as good a platform at the top end of the English game, Premier League aside, that you could find if you're a young player looking to progress your career. So, yeah, I think Riedisheim's credentials in that area are going to be massive because identifying talent and then that tricky pathway from academy to first team, which take John Rowe out in the last season or two, as there's certainly nothing in comparison to the Farker talent pipeline that we had with Aarons and Lewis and Godfrey and Cantwell to a degree. They need to get back to that. And it needs to be a steady supply of quality young players who can come in and play in a first-team environment under a head coach where they're going to flourish.
Yeah, I suppose, Sam, a little bit was sort of asked around David Wagner and Ben Napper's decision to part with him. We won't go on too much detail about it, but what did you kind of make about his wording for why he maybe has decided now is the time for this new project?
Yeah, it just felt like it was exactly what everyone had been saying last season, really. He referenced the fact that as soon as he arrived at the club, he spoke about the sort of football that he wanted to see and why that played a part in the decision. He also spoke about the youth pathway. And although obviously he was in a difficult position when we last spoke to him at the end of January or the start of February, because he was still planning to have David Wagner in charge until the end of the season and probably didn't want to voice his displeasure with the head coach at that time when actually Norwich's push for a playoff place and ultimately promotion was going pretty well. I think this was actually the answer that he would have given back then if he was able to be completely honest and open without having to consider the short-term impact that it might have had at that time. I think everyone really knew that when you looked at the discrepancy between what was happening on the pitch and what Wagner was implementing and what he'd spoken about wanting to bring to the football club. So I think this was basically what everyone was speculating about going into the end of the season. It was why everyone was saying surely he was going to go, even when things were going as well as they did. And although Napper was pretty courteous about Wagner and spoke very well about him as a person, as everyone does, to be fair, and as I think everyone recognises he was and is a good person without necessarily suiting the Norwich City way. I think this was an opportunity for him to be a bit more honest about how he saw things last season and how things developed to the point where they were. So no real surprises for me there, but it just helped reinforce why Thorup is the man who replaces Wagner and why that ideology is a bit more aligned now than it was under Wagner, where I think everyone could see the separation and the distance between the two.
Yeah, obviously Napper kind of spoke about the recruitment process of bringing Johannes Hoff Thorup to Norwich. He spoke about maybe scouting the world wide and maybe having a criteria and a profile of manager that they wanted. They kind of looked at various individuals and he said they had high quality individuals that they went then to the interview stage. Based on that, sort of the process there, how much kind of, I suppose, trust then do you have to give Ben Napper in that, he's now sort of had this period of time. He's had a clear, period now to assess who he wants. Is that sort of lengthy process almost give you a little bit more confidence, I suppose, heading into a new season, that it's not kind of a quick fire decision that's been made, off the back of a manager being dismissed halfway through a season?
No, absolutely not. And we know that simply by the quotes from Thorup, that the initial contact with his advisors was months and months in the making, very thorough, very forensic. We got a bit more sense of that today. And following on from Sam's point, clearly very early on in Ben Napper's tenure, which was November last year, David Wagner wasn't going to be the man. But you obviously need to then, put the blocks in place to have that transition. And of course, Sargent came back in January. They started to win games, and the top six aspirations overtake, I guess, what was going to happen with the managerial situation. But very clear that there was a twin track process that was working on in the background. I'm pretty sure Wagner and Beulah were aware of that towards the end of the season. In fact, I know they were. So, this certainly wasn't a day after the lead second leg, see you later, David, or what we're going to do now. That was almost just almost hitting the button on the end game of this process, very lengthy process. I did ask in that segment whether they'd had to give Thorup the hard sell, because he might have looked at it from afar in a club who, maybe have an aging squad and fallen short in the playoffs. No more parachute money as well, the financial element to that. And it didn't sound like that was the case. And I thought Thorup was interesting on that in terms of flipping it. Why Norwich? Why now? He's a very highly rated coach. He's making waves in European club football. He wouldn't have been short of offers or certainly expressions of interest. And why Norwich? And he said something I thought was very interesting where he's looked around and he referenced them, didn't he? Like the jobs that Ten Hag had done at Ajax. There was one or two other managers where they've maybe not had huge amounts of resource, but they've overachieved and they've had an environment where they can actually do that. And he's looked at holistically the environment and the people and felt that maybe he's got a chance of doing that. And it sounds like that's maybe why he's seen Nordstrand to Norwich as a better step up than maybe going a little bit too high up the food chain at this stage, because he is still a very relatively inexperienced first team coach. So, he as much as Norwich have scoped him out, you can be sure he scoped Norwich out. And it's a very small sample, but just seeing the two of them in close proximity today, you could see that they think alike in terms of their football outlook and what they're striving to achieve. And that alignment, that word we keep hearing a lot, which clearly wasn't there, I don't think, in the core fundamental areas of how a team plays, faith in youth, working with a certain type of squad player. That wasn't really there with Wagner and Napa. Why would it be necessarily? Because he inherited Wagner. That wasn't his recruitment. This very much is his guy. And you could see that today. You could see just the way that they talk and that relationship is obviously already starting, to be quite a multi-layered one. I thought it was a funny line from Thorup when he was talking about he's spending more time on his phone to Napa than he is his wife at present, primarily maybe in terms of the squad and the transfer window, what that looks like. But, you don't want to keep harping back, but this feels very much to me like the start of Weber and Farker and that kind of two like-minded individuals who are striving for the same goal and see the paths to getting that goal very similar, almost synergy. And, if it ends up in a couple of attempts in the Premier League, but slightly doing things a bit better and a bit different, then that wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing. But there's absolutely no doubt that Napa and Thorup see the game in the same light and see the faith in youth similarly and the style of play and the style of football. And that has to be a pretty powerful force, I think, if you're Norwich, because they are now going to have to do this without kind of any sort of parachute payments to fall back on. It's going to have to be far more organic. Yes, we know the American presence is there and they have facilitated that Cordoba deal at the start of the summer, but it's still going to have to be, bottom up, being very astute, trying to be ahead of the curve in many areas of the game to give them those advantages, which if you stitch them all together means Norwich can collectively in the Championship again this season punch above their weight.
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of talk around recruitment. We'll sort of break down all of the parts individually. If we start kind of back inwards, I suppose, Sam, in terms of players that could arrive at Carrow Road. I mean, Thorup mentioned quite a few times about maybe the high quality players he's got in this squad and sort of trying to bed in some of these younger players as well. Did you kind of get the sense that it's going to be a really active window for Norwich, or maybe kind of a transitional one where they bring in a few and then sort of gradually each window build on it?
Yeah, I mean, he was always going to set the bar fairly low rather than in his first press conference saying, we're going to sign loads of players, we're going to make loads of changes, everyone get excited about this. And then, if they underdeliver, everyone's going to be disappointed and there's going to be a lack of faith in Thorups' words from pretty early on. So, yeah, I think as per a lot of his answers, there was an element of management in there as well. But it didn't sound particularly like they're expecting loads and loads of business, especially when you marry that with the talk about players coming back from loans. And as Pad referenced earlier, the fact that he wants them to feel like they're already part of the group rather than sort of auditioning. And that will certainly be needed to pad the squad out if they aren't going to do that business. But given the amount he talked about the quality of the current side, and there are obvious caveats to that, but given the amount he did talk about that, you'd suggest it maybe won't be as much business as a lot of people might have been anticipating going into the window. I think finances obviously play quite a significant role in that, but he's also somebody who sees it as his role to develop players, and that's something he talked about a lot, not just young players and not just bringing players through, but I think he said you can improve a 35-year-old, you can improve a 26-year-old, just as you can improve an 18-year-old coming through the ranks. And I think he wants to do a lot of that. He actually said, I think, that he prefers to be on the pitch working with players currently at the club than in the office calling ones who aren't. And I actually found that a pretty refreshing perspective, because you do get the sense that for a lot of years in English football, as there hasn't maybe been this sporting director model, it has been a lot of managers demanding things from people above them and wanting better players. But he's somebody who's clearly keen to make the players he already has a lot better and to suit them to his system, rather than only signing players who very specifically suit that system and incurring cost a lot. He seems to be somebody who understands the model, understands the financial necessities currently at the club, and because of that, it does feel like it won't be as active a transfer window as a lot of people are hoping for. And yes, he left the door open. Napper left the door open as well and said that, you know, it wouldn't be diligent and it wouldn't be professional not to be looking at their options and considering them as much as possible. So I think the business is absolutely nowhere near done yet, but it isn't going to be, you know, absolute wholesale changes in one window. And that was the message you got from sort of both of them, really. So yeah, I think maybe not super exciting in terms of how he spoke about that. He was never going to come out and tell us his plan for which positions he wanted to sign players in, who he wanted to sign. But yeah, I think as far as the numbers go, what he was saying didn't suggest it was going to be an especially high number. But I did find it encouraging that he seemed to understand the imperatives of his role at Norwich, and that developing players is as important as being able to sign the right ones there.
Yeah, also seen a few rumours around Johnny Rowe's future, Gabriel Zara's future. I'd imagine Josh Sargent, there'll be links away further on into the summer. In terms of the outgoings, you sort of mentioned to Ben Napper maybe the requirement to sell these bigger assets in order to, you know, bring in cash maybe for them to go back into the market. His answer to that was, there's always pressure on us to sell, whether we have to or not, or we don't want to. That's our model, and we put pressure on ourselves to do that. There's lots of conversations going on at the minute. I mean, on that, Paddy, what do you make of that kind of that sort of sustainable model that Norwich almost have, where they sort of try and, you know, bring through players, develop them, and then sell them on for sort of bigger fees to then maybe, you know, utilise that cash again back in the market to try and, you know, keep themselves afloat? Is that something that the fans would necessarily want to hear? Obviously, there's been criticisms of that before. There's been pros to that. But I think maybe in recent years, sort of the time under Farker where it worked so successfully, it's maybe gone away from that a little bit. Is that something that you feel that Ben Napper and Johannes Hoff Thorup could, I suppose, reignite?
Well, time will tell, Alan, but it has to be that, because of the model that this club is set up on and aligned. They got it right in those periods where, you know, they were able to put a brand of football on the pitch, which was not only entertaining but aesthetically very pleasing to watch, but actually highly effective. You know, 2 championship titles speaks for itself. Where it fell down, of course, was then, and, you know, dare I say it, that team are playing blue over the border may experience that this summer. You're going into a vastly different transfer window market if you're trying to buy for Premier League sustainability in the first place. Well, survival, then sustainability. The sums involved, particularly for a self-finance club, the element of gamble recedes alarmingly. You know, you can't afford to get it wrong, and we all would, by common consent, say they got it wrong in those transfer windows. The first Premier League season, they didn't really have the finances because they were still righting the ship after the championship seasons. But certainly 2021, as we know now, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, you know, none of those players really certainly came in and impacted it in that Premier League season that followed. And unfortunately, then Norwich had to live with the financial consequences thereafter. And that is why, to bring it full circle, they will need to trade. And those are the 3 saleable assets: Rowe, Zara, Sargent. heard nothing today that doesn't make me think at least one and maybe more than one of those three will have to be sold. And then it's about being astute with what they do with those funds. And it doesn't sound like they're going to bank, hypothetically, I don't know, 25, 30 million pounds and then suddenly go to market and spend 25, 30. That's just not how it's going to work. That's completely the opposite or runs counter to why they've brought this guy in and what Napa's challenging him to do. So, no, I think the financial sustainability as we sit here now will necessitate that they sell players this summer, throw in Nunes into that mix. And this is where the fluid situation comes, because right here, right now, we can't say definitively which of those players will go, but some of those players will go. And then it's about replacing them, whether internally or whether, astute use of loans, astute use of the free transfer market to keep the show on the road on the pitch. And that was the genius of Farker and Webber when they got it right, that they were able to marry those two things. They were able to sell players that they'd produced homegrown for big money while still keeping it going on the pitch. And it was only really when they pushed up against the Premier League that they found that a bridge too far, both on the pitch and off the pitch. So that's all to come. Obviously, they have to get there first. But in the here and now, at the start of this project under Thorup, it will require them to sell players this summer, absolutely. Yeah.
One player that looks like he might be staying at Carrow, Kenbo, of course. I think we've kind of messaged maybe, in recent weeks that we've kind of got the instinct feeling that he's going to be signing a new deal. I mean, Ben Napa didn't quite confirm it, Sam, but near enough. I mean, the words were nothing done yet, so it'd be remiss for me to talk too much about it. But we're in a really good place. There's a few details to finalise, but I think we'd find a solution sooner rather than later. I mean, that confirmation of that news, how positive is that for Norwich? Even if it is going to be a loan spell for him this season, hopefully he gets kind of an Abu Kamara loan and then maybe comes back in next season, affects it based on his numbers. In Norwich's academy, he's a talent. Waiting to explode on the scene, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really good news, and news that Norwich fans were desperate for when it looked like Abo was probably more likely to leave towards the end of the season, and it actually speaks volumes to the work that Napa has done, the ideology there clearly is behind the club, and not only how that's being messaged externally, but also internally. It's obviously clear from this news that young players inside the club and people inside the club are well aware that this is a priority now, rather than, when under David Wagner, it was all words and it was all external, but internally the signs were just that there wasn't really that much of an opportunity to break through. There weren't chances being given to young players. And I think the fact that Napa's gone and got rid of David Wagner, brought in a coach very well known for developing young players, I think that would have played obviously a huge part in Kenebo's decision, because, by all accounts, he was somebody who was definitely considering leaving in a big way going into this summer. And for them to be able to turn that around and to convince him to stay at the club, they must have had some pretty good reasons. So, yeah, I think it shows good things in the bigger picture. And just specifically referring to Kenbo, I think anyone who's seen him play for the under-21s knows what a talent there is there. Obviously, he hasn't got much senior football under his belt at all. It is a huge jump from under-21s football up to the Championship, and maybe there might be a loan, between now and him eventually playing a key role in the team. But for a coach who loves working with good young players, for fans who are crying out for the next generation of them, I think that's fantastic news. It ends that conversation for a little while and just sets the tone for what hopefully will be a pretty positive summer for Norwich. And yeah, although obviously Napa wasn't confirming anything, he didn't want to be too revealing in what he said, it does sound like that is very, very much moving towards a conclusion.
Another relatively young striker who came through Norwich's academy, maybe hasn't quite made the impact he'd have liked, got the loan move to Celtic in January, of course, Adamida. A lot's been spoken around maybe his future in this sort of summer window thus far. Celtic obviously clearly interested in bringing him back up to Scotland. I think Brendan Rodgers has been quite open about his desire to make him a Celtic player. Adamida, I think we know, obviously given his maybe supporting roots, he's obviously a Celtic lad. Maybe there's going to be a willingness for him to go and explore that opportunity again. But I felt Johannes Hoff Thorup very kind of, I suppose, quite bullish in that he wanted to make it clear that he's going to be part of his plans in the early part of pre-season. He wants to get eyes on him, exciting, dangerous were sort of words that he used around him. I mean, Paddy, what did you sort of take from that response, from him? Is that someone you could see maybe working in maybe a Thorup system, but also him as a player? Is he going to suit what he wants from individuals?
Clearly, from how effusive he was and very, keen almost to get that out, that this is a player who excites him. He talked about his profile of striker, and my take on that would be that he's very much a player who he feels could work in his system. Sam's maps it out. There's lots of moving parts to this situation, but in the here and now, it's very clear that Norwich want Adamida back in the building, and Thorup wants to have a proper look at him in pre-season, and no decisions will be taken up until that point. And as it stands, if Adamida maybe can be convinced, because what triggered his desire to get away and get himself that very successful loan move was a lack of regular football. He's 23 years of age now. We've just talked about Ken Abbo. Johnny Rowe has made that breakthrough. It's only injuries that's held him back. Adamida must be turning around looking at these guys who are younger than him and feeling, I need to get my career going now. And he's right about that. And he will not want to come back and be a bit part player as he has been under a series of Norwich managers, head coaches. So it'll be whether if Thorup believes Adamida is part of his plans, convincing Adamida that he will have a frontline role. And of course, for me, you can't ignore that there is a dimension here with Sargent. What happens with him? There's going to be interest in him, especially if he has a good Copa America. I wouldn't be surprised if Sargent was keen to explore maybe higher level opportunities, because he's got some big tournaments coming down the line for his country in the next sort of 2 years. He will want to be in the most high profile league he can find. May feel you could argue, outgrown the Championship given his productivity last season in a vastly injury hit season, but still 16 or 17 goal contributions in 26 games. If a Premier League club hypothetically were to come along, he might want to, take that opportunity. So that then has a knock-on effect in terms of Adamida's scenario. So many moving parts at this stage of the summer, but what we know definitively now, having spoken to Thorup, is that he likes Adamida very much, likes the type of profile of striker he is, feels he could work in his system, and much like with the younger players, he will get an opportunity in pre-season, and then it's up to him. But at the back of your head is those quotes when he came out, after the end of the season, and how much he'd enjoyed Celtic and almost it had relaunched his career. And while thankful for everything Norwich had given him, he was almost speaking about his time at Norwich in the past tense. The line about feeling he was a scapegoat here at times, none of that screamed that there's a player who is really got his heart set on coming back into Norwich's setup and then playing for Norwich. Celtic, given the family connection, given what it means to any Irish sort of bred player person, he'll get European football with them as well. He'll be competing for trophies year in, year out. It's 60,000 every other home game. Why wouldn't you want to go and have a bit more of that? So I still think it'll end really in a deal being struck. But if you're Celtic and you're hearing what Thorup's got to say, you're probably feeling, well, okay, we're going to have to work very hard to maybe get him out of Norwich, because, I don't think they're pushing against an open door. It's not that a head coach has come in, doesn't fancy him and wants him out the door, and then it's over to Ben Napper to do a deal. It feels like the playing field is there for Adamida to come back and maybe finally claim, what he would feel is his right, which is to lead Norwich's attack. But as I say, the Sargent situation, the Celtic situation, I think if it's Celtic or any other club come with a valuation that matches Norwich's, I think you probably shake hands and feel that's probably a good move all round, because there's no guarantee. His stock is very high now after what he did at a high-profile club like Celtic. If he came back and was convinced to stay and he slips back into his bit part role, you're not going to be attracting the sort of sums that you might get this summer. So it's a delicate balancing act for Thorup and Napper. But I just think from Adamida's sense, from those quotes, and the mindset, he wants to be, he wants to be at Celtic. He doesn't want to be at Norwich. So it'll probably come down to, can they get a deal done?
Yeah, I see a few questions flying through. Just try and pull some of these up on the screen. Tim Page saying, Paddy, how did the Americans facilitate the Cordoba deal? A loan for spare cash from their previous equity injection. If loan, are we expecting that to be paid back from sales?
Very specific question, Tim. I can't give you a specific answer in terms of the structure of that, but what I was told, it wasn't connected because it's a very simple zero-sum game to look at. They got X for Zolis, and a similar amount went out for Cordoba, but I was told Cordoba would be done irrespective of whether Fortuna had taken up their buy option. So how would it have been done? You look at the financial picture mapped out in the last set of accounts, nearly £100 million in debt, according to Kieran Maguire. Obviously, that's moved on now subsequently because there was a trading surplus last summer plus a final parachute payment, but still, it's going to be north of 65, 70 million, I think, in terms of the current debt situation. So there's only one avenue who would have facilitated Ben Napper to go and do that. We know he was out in America at the back end of the season. And that was, the green light from Norfolk Holdings and Atanasio to, and I think, to be fair, am I right in saying, I think at the AGM in November, didn't Mark Atanasio more or less infer that, Ben's going to wait and put a plan together, and it may require us trying to help him out where we can in one or two areas in terms of player signings. So I think we're basically just rolling on from that position that was stated by Mark himself in November. But in terms of, you'd need Kieran Maguire here rather than me to talk to you about the financials of how that's happened. But rest assured, that has happened with the Americans backing Ben Napper.
Yeah, Bish saying, I'd be shocked if we sign more than two players unless a lot of our assets get sold. Apart from the required left back, I think we'll see squad refresh from younger players getting a chance. There's a question here from Ali Clark. I don't think the Norwich model works, given that you'll end up selling your best players. How are you going to be sustainable in the Premiership doing this? I mean, Sam, obviously we've spoken a lot around kind of maybe the recruitment elements here and the sustainable sort of selling of players. That question there from Ali, sort of, how do Norwich maybe bridge that when they do hopefully eventually get back to the promised land?
If I had an answer for that, I'd be a sporting director. But well, I think it means having to sign players cheap that are then Premier League quality. You look at if things had gone successfully in 2020 or 2021, then that would have been based on players who were signed for cheap as a Championship club, then going on and achieving more in the Premier League. And obviously that's evidence that it's incredibly difficult to do that. But clubs have done that. Brentford,
Brighton
have done that. Brighton, there are examples, and although they're rare, which is probably a bigger discussion about the state of English football and the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, it is definitely possible. And that's the task that Norwich and a lot of if not all the Championship clubs are trying to complete. So yes, it is difficult, and obviously the fact that you have to sell players makes it a lot more difficult, but promotion means there's less of an imperative on the club to sell players to raise funds, because we all know the sort of revenue that being in the Premier League gets you. But the problem is that they haven't been able to build those squads strong enough to stay in there for longer, keep those players for longer, and not be in a situation where they need to sell players to generate those funds. So what it's about is getting your recruitment right, finding some gems for pretty cheap, and then making it count once you get there. So there are a lot of steps. It is very difficult, but it is possible, as clubs have proven before.
Yeah, lots of excitement throughout the comments. Grumpy Grandad, exciting times ahead, I feel, lads. Luke Travis, after hearing Johannes speak, it's understandable why Napper was willing to wait, make his move at the end of the season. He was also clear that Johannes Hoff Thorup aligned with all things that Wagner wasn't. Bish saying better vibe and answers than either Smith or Wagner's introduction, and felt quite optimistic. Self-assured but not arrogant. Also seemed like Napper and him are on the same page. Jeffman saying Thorups unveiling filled me with a lot more confidence than that of Wagner and Smith. Clear plan, clear identity, clear messaging. Can't wait for the season to start now. Dan Mayhew going down a similar vein, saying the right things in terms of a style of playing culture. My only concern is around transfers. I'm really happy with his thoughts on youth and giving them a chance. Tom as well saying all the right things. Proof will be in the pudding, I suppose. Excited. I think there's a few more further down here. Dan Mayhew saying most clubs who are not in the top 6 / top clubs in other leagues will have to sell to buy. Even Dortmund have to sell. Rob saying, given Thorup is going to focus on young players, is it likely that we're going to have a transition season where we finish mid-table? I mean, we did speak a little bit about that. Sort of, how do you see it, Paddy? If it does end up being a season where it's mid-table, is that the end of the world, I suppose?
Well, I mean, it's one for the Norwich fans to if they, for me personally, though, if I was to see signs of progress, clear progress, and Ben Napper didn't he talks at the end about there will be periods where it runs away from a little bit in the season, but if they've communicated, and today was the start of that this is a longer evolutionary process, then they'll hope that they get the buy-in that they need in those more testing periods, because you're going to get those in the Championship irrespective, but you'll certainly get that with what feels a marked shift away from Wagner in terms of playing style and culture. Before we walked in there today, I thought it felt to me it was a transition season. It felt maybe it was, inside the top 10 would be a good season, but you can only go by what Thorup himself said, and it didn't strike me that he was a manager planning for a lower mid-table or a mid-table season. I think he feels, and maybe it's a signal he backs himself, he backs his own ability to improve these players he's already got under his command, with Ben Napper alongside him, to what they can do within the financial constraints we've talked about, improve the squad again, that they can hope for more. And, popped into me, Paul Warren, obviously big Norwich fan, Derby manager. He was on TalkSport recently, and he's got Derby into this division this season. And he was saying he looked at it last season, and there was maybe, I think most people felt this, there was 3 or 4 standout teams at the top, but then from 7th down to 20th, very tight. And it wasn't it? Way into the second part of last season, there was a lot of jockeying and not many points separating teams. And if we're in for that again type of season, it's not going to take much to get yourself from mid-table to into the sort of top 8 bracket, and then who knows then if you get on a roll. So, yeah, I feel actually in terms of status, league status, what next season could bring, a little bit more. Maybe we can raise our sights a bit under this head coach, but 6 weeks doesn't feel a huge amount of time to get his philosophy across, and I fear we will have. We've talked about it in the last segment. We will have this overhang. 5 or 6 games into the season before the window officially closes, we'll have Rowe speculation, Sarah, Sargent, Eder, if that's still not been resolved, maybe Nunes. All of that is really unwanted in terms of what Napper and Thorup are trying to do, which is, bring the circle tight. These are the group of players we want to work with. These are the players I'm going to back now to get us into a decent position this season. So lots of imponderables, some of the controllables that they can deal with, some that are out of their control. But overall, no, I think I'm gonna be bold and say top 10.
There we go. Robert saying we have a history of exceeding expectation with new managers, Lambert, Farker, etc. Let's hope it happens again. Dan Mayhew saying, out of the prized assets, who would you sell? Are there any players you'd like to come in? I'd still say sell Zara and bring in Taylor Booth. I suppose one word answer from both of you. You get to sort of sell one of the 3, I suppose, Rowe, Sargent, Sarah. Which one would it be?
Rowe. Can I have more than one
Yeah,
word?
go on in.
I think he's the one with the most direct replacement in Kamara. I also think he's had an unbelievable burst of form, and although he's a very talented player, there have been injury struggles. He hasn't proven himself at a higher level before either. And I think although he is clearly an incredible talent, it's easier to find talents like that on the wing than it is to find a creative like maybe a Gabriel Sara. So I think if the fees are similar, then probably Rowe over all of them. But ultimately, if you get offered 15 million more for Sara than a Rowe or a Sargent, it's going to be difficult to say no.
Agree with that,
Pad? 100%.
Yep. Tom as well here saying, if Norwich got to the Premier League, could you see an influx of investment from outside sources, possibly once Mark Attanasio is in full control over a period of time?
Well, again, he touched on that, didn't he? I think it was when you chaps had a round table with him immediately after that November's AGM, where he was talking about outside investment. And I think, paraphrasing, it was they would still control it very much, the direction of travel. But he seemed to suggest they would be receptive to bringing in outside investors and divesting the share element a little bit if that brought in cash injections, which, to go back to the discussion point, and it's a fair one, can this model work in its current guise to get you not only into the Premier League, that's probably the easier part of the two, but to stay there and sustain it. If that isn't going to be possible, then maybe that is an avenue whereby, you're still, effectively Mark Attanasio and Norfolk Holdings are driving the ship, as it were, but bringing in like-minded investors and providing that cash injection, which could make the difference in terms of recruitment.
Yep, Jeffman feeling very confident. Abu Kamara Golden Boot winner 24-25. You heard it here first. Just to sign off, so as we've spoken here for sort of the last 50 minutes or so around everything that's happened and maybe was said this morning, are you excited now for pre-season, the new season ahead after what you've heard today, Sam?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it for a while, but I think, this just made it feel even more real, made it feel even more exciting, and given the ideology that he's spoken about, the strength with which he's sort of spoken about his principles, I'm excited to see a Norwich team that looks like that, and actually even just to see what the 11 looks like. I think the team news for that game against Stevenage, and then because some of them are away on internationals and stuff, and so probably the team news for the friendlies late in July will actually be almost as interesting as anything else that happens in pre-season, because the squad is in such a state of flux now with those players coming back from loans, the holes that are left from those that departed on free transfers, that I think it's really hard to predict, which actually for me makes it pretty exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, what about you two?
Yeah, obviously spoke kind of a lot about pre-season, I suppose, and I think that's going to be sort of the first opportunity maybe to see this kind of these words maybe put into a tangible product on the pitch that we can then kind of see what Norwich are going to look like and what we can sort of expect, I suppose, moving forwards into the new season. I think obviously given that it's been sort of a bit of a lull maybe period over recent weeks and sort of the transfer activity is quiet down, I think when that obviously ramps up a little bit, maybe a little bit further into July, I think maybe that excitement will build a lot more. And yeah, I really can't wait to see what we're going to get from this new project, particularly given kind of last season, and the way that Wagner kind of obviously conducts himself really well, but the brand of football on the pitch maybe didn't align to what a lot of fans wanted to see. But this feels a lot more kind of positive. Would you sort of agree with that assessment, Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, we won't say who, but we were speaking to a Norwich official at the end of the formal presser today, and they think that they have got a manager who's going that way, and Norwich can ride on his coattails for however long, because obviously the corollary to that would be that if he's moving on to higher up the food chain, he's done well at Norwich, and hopefully that translates into Premier League. But they really think now they've got in at a point where his stock was only going to go one way, and he would have been way out of Norwich's bracket in terms of potential head coach target. So, if that is the case, then strap yourself in, because it's going to be an exciting few seasons. But everything from him today, in terms of his demeanour and how he spoke and the steeliness, and very much knows what he wants, and you don't think he's going to stop until he gets it either. So I think that's all very positive. And the only imponderable now is how long it takes. It feels like it's going to be he will get Norwich to where they want to go, which is the Premier League. But how long will it take? And then if they do, then hopefully they can carry on and continue the next stage, which is where Brighton have gone and Brentford have gone and managed to sustain themselves. And I don't think with this guy and Napa alongside him, we're in for years and years of Ipswich mediocrity before they manage to finally get it right. The endless mid-table. How many years we're in the Championship? 15 years. Yeah. I don't think we're in for that scenario. So onwards and upwards, hopefully.
A couple of last late comments. Hamish saying Tessie to join the backroom staff spotted in Norwich last week. Jeffman saying any update on the new front of shirt sponsorship? I'm hoping it's Coleman's. Well, little inside that the new home shirt was being photographed in the press room after we left today. We didn't have the privilege of actually seeing it, but we can confirm it's yellow and green. So that's obviously positive news. Paddy, there's a question here from Fiona saying, do you think Celtic can come up with the money for Adamina?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think they're in. Not following them that closely, but I think they're trying to sell players. Are they? Yeah. So, and you would think, with the great respect to even Celtic's global scale, finances aren't such in Scotland that they won't be able to spend millions and millions on multiple players. So, it might come down to whether they can. But certainly from Norwich's perspective, anything I would say south of 6 million isn't going to get the job done. And there was talk, wasn't there? Mikey Johnson could get thrown in, and it might be player plus cash. I mean, there's so many scenarios in play here, but I repeat, if they can put a package together that meets Norwich's valuation, I think that deal will get done, because the player clearly is absolutely desperate to get back to Glasgow.
There we go. I think with that, we're going to sign off. Of course, the full press conference is now available on our YouTube channel, or you can, of course, get it on all the audio Spotify platforms of various sorts. If you want to just get it on in the background, maybe, of course, all the words as well on the Pink and Plus app. You can take out a free trial, $2.99 a month thereafter. Of course, the tours and stuff are all coming up, so well worth signing up now ahead of pre-season, ahead of a new season, of course, a new dawn, a new era under Johannes Hoff Thorup. With that, we're going to sign off from the sunny city. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.